Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time zone you're in, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Podcast. And today we'll be talking with a good friend of ours, Tony Thayer. Tony is a leadership consultant and has some really interesting and different insights that I thoroughly enjoy hearing from him about how to be successful and have teams that are both high producing as well as they're having a good time, which I like that model because there's a lot of research that says that happy teams are more high performing and have reduced turnover, which is a great cost savings measure for any company. So enjoy. Thanks. I'm trying to think of a funny starting point to stick in here right now, and I'm completely blanking, which is really funny.
Well, I'll just say then, so you can edit this in.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the nice words, Bill. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Tony. One of the things that I really enjoy about our conversations is how well our senses of humor work together, and how often you'll say something and I'll just bust up laughing or vice versa. It's really good. So um, the topic of conversation today is all about leadership communication, and part of the reason that I wanted Tony on the podcast is because he's really good at leadership communication, and the way that he talks about it is different than the way that I talk about it. And I think that for the audience, having that that difference means that people can see it from different angles. They can hear it from different angles. And there's some people that the way that I think and talk about leadership, it won't resonate for them necessarily. But the way that Tony talks about it, it will. That's my hope anyway. I'm trying to figure out how to be closer to being all things to all people.
Well, no, but that's a great starting point because if you're a leader and you want to up level your game and create a better team that produces more and has more fun and has an upward spiral of energy, you have to spend some time looking at what is the real issue of leadership. And of course, communication fits into that. But yeah, just like there's many voices that can tell you how it seems to them, and then you get to digest all that and come up with your own version. That's an
Right.
important part of understanding what it's like for the people you're communicating with as a leader. Like they all hear your words in different ways, and there is no right way to say it. You just have to try something else if you don't get through to one guy or one woman, because they don't hear it the way you've decided to say it.
Jazz improv is probably a really good metaphor for that.
Improv's a great metaphor for that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the compelling words of improv are yes and, but the normal traditional way of management is like, no, do it my way. And that's like a shutdown. And the
Right.
yes and thing is like, whatever you said, I say yes to, and let me add this because it's more than that,
Right. Right.
which
Yeah.
is basically the key to inclusion.
Oh, that's a really yeah. I like that. Yeah. That's. I wonder where did you learn that?
I was a manager, baby. It took me years.
So it was just the School of Hard Knocks.
I started out, my first supervising job was at a 24-hour production facility. And I had never supervised, never taken any training, and I didn't really want to be a manager. But the guy who led that died unexpectedly. Well, I guess usually it is unexpected, but all of a sudden I walked in one day, we didn't have a manager. And I just quickly calculated that for my career advancement of that company, that would be a good. So I just jumped in. I volunteered. I scored a lot of points, and then all of a sudden, I learned that this guy had created a disaster, and people were really unhappy. Customers were unhappy. Production quotas were down, and production deliveries were late.
Wow.
And I didn't know a damn thing about production or management, so I just learned to talk to my crew, like, what's going on here? What do you think we should be doing about it? And for some reason, that's what they needed to hear. Somebody listening to them. They didn't feel like they were seen or appreciated before.
That's interesting. Part of as you're saying that, part of what I'm hearing is that when you ask the people questions, you're giving them ownership of the solution.
Well, we're right on topic now, aren't we?
Yeah. And I was thinking, somebody a couple weeks ago had asked me about what it was that I was doing with my software teams that had them
Right.
succeed really well.
Because
And
you
I
do a
think,
great job of that. Yeah, I understand.
yeah, and I think, as you're saying that, you're doing a better job of verbalizing what I said, because I said, well, they were always part of the process, and having them be part of the process meant, as you just said, that they had ownership, and it wasn't me dictating what we were going to do. I knew strategically what we were aiming for, and we knew, we're writing software, right? And it's got usability boundaries and API stuck up to it and all that stuff. So we knew that the the borders and the boundary cases, but they had a ton of ownership of how it all how it all worked. Yeah,
Yeah. Many, it's like you can create a super network out of a bunch of PCs, right? You
yeah,
can create a supercomputer by networking a bunch of PCs. And it's really, when the manager has this sensibility that he is or he or she are responsible for the results, it gets very constricting inside their body. Like, you don't, I mean, it's one thing to say, don't fuck it up as a person, but it's another thing to sort of pass that on to your whole team. You guys better not fuck it up.
right,
And it takes
right,
oxygen out of the room. And
yeah,
so that's, I mentioned to you before, Bill, that I was watching this podcast with Steve Kerr talking to Jon Stewart, and he has this beautiful expression of like his role as a coach of the world.
hold that
If he,
thought.
okay.
Hold that thought. I've got to pause. Okay, we're back. I'm gonna have to figure out how to stick a commercial for something in there, and that little pause.
Get
Just
sponsors, yeah.
yeah, like
Available now, sponsorship, and see your business here.
exactly. I could do that. Yeah, but yeah, we were talking about giving the team ownership of the solutions, and I
Uh, Yeah. And I was saying, I use the word oxygen and inspiration. Like when the team has ownership, it's like injecting oxygen into the system and the
right,
organism breathes better.
right, yeah,
And yeah, I think the typical employee, like the Gallup polls have said for 20 years that something like 20 to 30% of the employees say they're engaged by their own self, assessment. And I think the disengaged employee, which is a big problem for a lot of leaders, something they talk about a lot. To me, the stereotypical mindset or sensibility that staff have is like, oh, the leaders and the managers are all in their world, taking on all these responsibilities. I'm just going to sit back until they make a decision.
right,
And it don't, not only takes oxygen out and sort of discounts their potential contributions, but it creates a cycle of disengagement.
right,
And to me, as a leader, because I generally found myself in positions where I didn't know what the hell was wrong, I just knew the customers were bitching to me about how this thing better get shaped up or we're going to cancel. So I just found it in my situation a natural recourse to go to the staff, call them together into groups, and say like, I don't get it. Like, I know you guys are all smart. I know you all care about your jobs. Um, every time I come to you and ask for help, you give me good suggestions, and yet as a team, we seem to be disappointing the customer. What's going on?
right,
And I was always blown away at how much they had to offer.
yeah.
And I ended up usually just saying, well, why don't you try that rather than telling them to do that?
What do you do when they say we don't know?
The most natural thing for me to do is say, I don't know either. What are we going to do about that?
How how do you create the space for the team to say that? And I ask this because I've noticed that, like, I've watched leaders ask their teams to figure out how to do things, and nobody on the team seems comfortable to say we have no idea. So how do you lubricate that as a leader to to get the team to be willing to volunteer?
Generally like that silence. There's just it's sort of a radical acceptance of silence and of not knowing. Because the longer it's like the old adage about sales, because that's what I did before I got into management was sales. And there's that old adage, whoever speaks first loses. You know, at the end of the negotiation, here's my offer. Zip your lips and let the other person process. So I guess I just took that to management. It's like we don't know what to do. And I might say, I don't know either. What are we going to do about that? And then I just sit. And sooner or later, somebody would crack. Well, we could try this. Because that's the thing about being a leader. It's like you're, it's like that thing I've mentioned briefly. Like I watched this podcast between Jon Stewart and Steve Kerr, the Warriors coach, and there's this sort of he has this beautiful observation that he's neither, well, he's both part of the management team, the group out there that constrains the team, and he's one of the guys. He's part of the team, and it's really just about involving the team in the situation because we're all in this together. Yeah, I think old school and maybe a lot of the old MBA programs taught that, leaders had to be decisive. And I just don't think that engages people, disengages people to let the leaders have all the problems and deal with them. It's not my problem becomes the mantra. And then things, even when you do make a decision, there's no buy-in. There's no real particular care.
Right.
Yeah, I'll say this too, Bill. It's like I'm a big proponent of having the team define their own intention. And by that, what I mean is we have work to do. We know what the tasks involved are to process from this place to this place so the customer has this result. That's what we deliver. This stuff has to be done. And it may be unpleasant. It may be like assembly line work where you're just punching a rivet into a piece of metal over and over again. But the group as a whole can decide what's our experience going to be like coming in here every day and doing our job every day. Not that we get to decide what's going to be done because there's a clear task that has to be done and there's tools and steps to get it done. Well, what kind of energy do we bring to that and to one another? And how much participation do we have in changing that which can be changed? And if the leader sees his role as injecting oxygen into the system so that people can all like take some ownership and have some self-expression, like, geez, it seems to me the problem is being stated wrong. If we stated like this, we could do this. And all of a sudden there's this sort of uplifting energy. You can see people's shoulders lift up. And that's what you want as a leader. You don't want compliance. You don't want, you know, people to do what they're told. You want people to rise up and feel energized and bring stuff to the table in a way that they jive and align with one another so that if there's a discussion that creates some controversy, they can hash it out and they can get passionate about it. And then they can all say, like, well, I felt like my voice was heard, but what are we going to do as a team? And it may be something I didn't recommend. I had this other idea, but at least at the end of the day, that was kind of fun. And we came together and decided this, I'm on board. And to me, management communication is whatever it takes to get people on board.
That's a really good. That's a really good way of saying it. Whatever it takes to get people on board,
Mm-hmm.
and clearly, if they're not, then as leaders, we need to take a step back and go, okay, what about that is ineffective for them to be on board?
Yeah.
What is it that leadership knows that the rest of the team doesn't understand that has them be resistant? What's the
Yeah.
data?
Well, I think that's an interesting phrase right there. Like, what is it the leadership has that they need to get people understanding to get on board? that's not how it works. People get on board because what they have gets expressed and heard. I think a lot of leadership is people doing what they think they're supposed to do. I found myself very nervous and agitated when I went in my first day as a supervisor. Like, it's so vulnerable. You're like out in front of a whole group of people,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
if you don't win their hearts, they'll eviscerate you if you stumble. And or at least that was sort of what I expected. That's the way I was seeing it. And I didn't know what to say, so I asked them, and I just found out that it worked. And so I wasn't trying to do what I was supposed to do, what my boss was telling me to do. Yeah, to me, it's kind of a funny story. When I got my second supervisory job at the same company, I was asked to go bail out a production operation we ran at a customer site in Silicon Valley. We had 20 people on site doing this thing. And after I started cleaning up the mess at the production center, this customer said, "We're going to cancel the contract because you guys aren't performing what we expected you to perform." And my boss asked me, he told me to go down and clean it up. He had some confidence in me. And it was just the same thing. These guys knew something that I didn't know. I didn't have, but my boss, who was old school, called me back after I started there. I guess he had heard some people talk about what I was doing, got some gossip on that, and he said, "There, you need to understand as a new manager, the way you're going to succeed is by scaring the crap out of your staff. They have to be afraid of you. They have to be afraid every time you walk in the room, and they have to, blah blah blah, that whole thing." But the 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 customer that was threatening to cancel, that had already said they were going to cancel the contract, we had put three managers down there before, and this is only like 6 months into the beginning of the operation. So we had this turnover every 2 months. The customer said, "This guy is not able to cut it. Get rid of him." And the first thing I had is in my mind as I was driving back from that meeting with my boss, where he told me I had to keep my customers scared. That's what he told the last three guys. So I know that won't work. I think that's what really opened me up just to like putting it on the staff. Like, hey, if we fail, yeah, I'm going to be out of a job, but so are you. So what are we going to do?
right.
And then it was on them.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely a building ownership thing.
I think a leader has to go in, deciding what his or her objective is, and then constantly ask themselves, "Am I getting that?" And whatever style of communication you're using, if you're not getting what you were hoping to get, then the mantra becomes try something else. And that's what I did. I just tried other things.
Do you think your background in sales made it easier for you?
Well, what's great about having a background in sales when you go into management is that you're used to reading people. I mean, there's so much pressure. Oh my God, I would have these like, yeah, multi-million dollar sales, and they go on for months. You establish the contact, and then you get, the RFP, and you give your response, and then you were one of the contending, applicants. So you make it down to the cut of three, and then you give these, and oh my God, it's pointless to do all that if you can't read and adapt to what you're seeing. So yeah, I think as a leader, it's really good to have a sales background and just some sort of conscious competence or unconscious competence at noticing that you're not getting what you were hoping to see from people.
That's a really interesting perspective because rarely do I hear people talk about that ability to read and communicate and the value of having a particular kind of a background for leadership roles.
Well, you can add to that. It's like a snap-on module, the whole thing on emotional intelligence. It's like
Right.
when you're under that kind of pressure and vulnerability in front of a group of people, especially when you're replacing another leader, and then it's like they may have liked that leader, they may be suspicious of you, and it's you need to establish some trust.
Right.
But man, the stress can get to you, and you can just have these flare-ups where you say something really unkind or cutting, or you just lose control and you just start, um, so your ability to recover in that moment and be able to own like, I lost my temper. I'm sorry. I know you guys all have lost your temper before. Give me a break. And, let's get on with it.
Right. Right.
But I think, for so many people, like when you lose your temper, you either get, you either dig in and feel like you have to maintain that line, in which case you're just making it worse, or you start to go into these, I guess you could call them shame cycles, where you feel like you fucked up and convince yourself that you won't be able to recover. It's just like, oh, I'm sorry, I lost my temper. How human.
Right.
Let's get back on track. What can I do to like acknowledge that I said something unkind?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so it's kind of, and thank you for what I notice as I say that, it's like there's just this ability to stay in focus with the bigger issue, which is what is the customer demanding and why aren't we able to produce that? Whatever
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
leadership is. How do we stay in that sort of sweet spot? Okay, we have something and we have some energy and ownership here. How can we use that in an invigorating, engaging way so that we feel really good about ourselves at the end of the day? It's that thing about intention. How do we want to feel when we leave here today?
Yeah.
And so what I'm reading as a ex salesperson becoming a leader is like when my people leave at the end of the day, especially when they leave at the end of a stressful day, they seem like they're upbeat and buoyant and having positive expectations about tomorrow. Because there's
Yeah.
nothing better than having a bunch of people show up the day after a stressful event saying like, hey, how's everybody doing? What are we going to do today?
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a mindset that I think that leaders need to at least catalyze that tone of.
Well, to me, it's just like try it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're having difficulties with a team, and this is something you can try, it feels good. It helps other people feel good. When people feel good, they get creative, and all of a sudden, you've got creative answers to a problem that's been eluding you.
Yeah. 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 Part of what you're talking about there is when you're talking about the emotional intelligence and the vulnerability of the role. I'm thinking distress tolerance is the skill set that you can recognize the value of being uncomfortable and not let that stop you and
Yeah,
figure out how to kind of compartmentalize the discomfort and say, yeah, it's uncomfortable and I still need to do this stuff. I need to figure out how do I still move forward in my responsibilities. What's the place where I can be uncomfortable and still be effective versus being so uncomfortable that I lose all effectiveness. And how do you ride that line?
yeah, absolutely. And how do you create a climate in where the people you're speaking to can ride that line too?
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Which, it's like I think it's really great for any leader to be married. Like the challenges of a relationship, the stressors. It's like this creating something bigger than yourself is challenging to your sense of self. So,
Hmm.
like having been married and having had that fall apart and then having to begin again, it's like I learned a lot about what works and doesn't work in interpersonal relationships. And um, the thing that really stuck out for me when I was trying to figure that kind of thing out is like the difference between complaining and criticizing. Like if you're under stress and you're kind of losing control, got that vulnerable position, if you can maintain an awareness that it's okay to complain, I'm not happy with what's happening here, without going into criticism and saying you aren't being effective in your role.
Right, right.
And there's one which is like, that's understandable. He's complaining. But the other one sort of gets back to our sense of, our American sense of liberty and independence. Like, who was he to tell me that I'm not good? And then
Right.
you have resistance and resentment building up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, the third, I often talk about the three R's of bad leadership situations of resentment, resistance, and reactivity. And if your people are reactive, they're not really owning what needs to be done.
Hmm.
They're like, I don't want to do it that way. So the whole point of engaging people and having ownership of the issue with them is so that they get out of that reactivity thing. It's like, I don't want to do it that way, to a place of like, what are we going to do about it? Well, we could try this, we could try that. So they're open and they're contributing.
Right.
So these are to me just some of the sort of, you call them mindsets. It's a good word for it. It's just ways of framing the day-to-day, moment-to-moment interactions. Like, yeah, I have enough emotional intelligence to understand that I'm getting really reactive and I'm about to, you know, blow my top, and just own it. You can just say it. What was remarkable for me is to be able to say, like, I'm about to lose my temper. That's a whole lot better than lashing out at somebody,
Right. Right.
because you're sort of tagging it and they know it's coming. And they then have an opportunity to be participants in de-escalating that and helping you. Um, but yeah, it's just about staying in that sweet spot of ownership and awareness of what the problem is and realizing we don't know. It's
Right.
really uncomfortable for people to be uncertain, but it's really productive to be uncertain if you can stay with it.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I think the comfort level with uncertainty varies across people.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I've certainly been in situations where there was a degree of uncertainty that for me was super easy, and for other people it was very uncomfortable. And I've worked with people who were they were they were striving to find places of more uncertainty. Basically, they wanted to do bigger experiments because in their mind, rightly so, that was where the most learning was. And so they were comfortable that the learning possibility of the bigger experiments were more than offset what the risk profile was. And I mean, they had failures. They would take big swings and they would completely miss. But
Yeah, if your swing takes 2 or 3 weeks at a critical juncture in the time schedule,
yep,
that's that's a big miss.
yeah, and yet we always recovered. The we always figured out ways to recover and solve the problem. You know,
Yeah, because ultimately you get back to that place of well, as what we're talking about is balance. You just get to that place where you can be with the challenge, the interpersonal relationships, the pressures, and the uncertainties of like,
right,
and there's just this, I don't know, it's sort of like an interpersonal field that you develop where you just with the fact that you got to ask, what are we going to do?
right, yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about whitewater rafting because that's a team thing,
Yeah,
and
it requires cooperation to
yeah,
avoid the big, what do you
yeah,
splashdowns, crashes.
yeah, getting ejected and
Yeah.
hitting a rock or whatever. And that's the thing is you have to be able to have the team operate together. Whoever's steering has the vision, the guide has the vision of where to go, and they also can adapt to the conditions as they're changing because the water flow is always a little bit different. And so you have to be able to go, oh, wait a minute, this place that we yesterday could go through here just fine, it won't work today.
That's such a great metaphor for the issue of leadership communication.
Yeah,
It's like everybody's there to have fun. Everybody's scared, maybe really scared,
yeah,
and everybody's kind of gulping like, why? And, there's just this magical thing about being like scared. It's this heightened emotional intensity,
oh yeah, yeah,
and so you venture out. But if you trust the guide,
right,
then it fits the team's intention to have fun and have a great day and to pitch in when it gets super scary. He's saying like, paddle right, go, go, go. And it's like everybody willingly does it. They don't say, I don't think that's a good idea. But
yeah,
that's just this
yeah,
balance of fear and uncertainty and trust and just this melange of different things that you just have to kind of nurture them all to come together.
right, right, yeah, and the way the guides get to be guides is they've done that river a ton of times. They've seen a lot of variables, and they have an understanding of what the boundaries are and the flexibility they have within the space of the boundaries. And so
Yeah.
they're like, oh yeah, we can push the boat over here. That'll be more exciting for the passengers or for the for the people that are part of the team that don't do this on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and here's a different twist though, comparing it to leadership. In the old days, mountain guides were people who just said, I think I'm going to be a mountain guide. I'll figure it out as I go along.
Right.
In today's world, if you want to be a whitewater rafting guide, there's probably like 3 or 4 certification programs you go through, and you get lots of detailed instructions on how to manage these balance points we've been talking about. And oddly enough, most leaders never have any leadership training.
Right. Exactly. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah,
nuts. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And they don't even. I'm always surprised at people who have leadership titles and they've never read any books on leadership, much
Yeah,
less actually had training. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like such a, for me anyway, it seems like such a logical thing to do. Probably because I grew up reading a lot,
Yeah.
and
I have a client who's a manager in a company where there's 10 members of the senior executive team. Yeah, the division director of this division and that division, their vice president. And he came to me one day and yeah, just as an aside, he said, Tony, I just found out that none of the members of the executive team have ever consulted with a coach. None of them use coaches, and they all seem to think that it would be embarrassing to admit they needed one, so they won't go there. Like he's basically saying, what kind of company am I working for?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. It always. I think that's such an interesting snapshot of a company, and I wonder how many other companies are doing that, right? And then how do you get people to understand that that's that's really damaging to their careers?
Well, this is an opportunity for you and I to, as an aside,
Yeah,
say that we both coach leaders, and if you have
right.
an interest in getting some coaching to find out, I happen to have a promotion where I do four coaching programs for the price of one, and you can get a sense of whether you want to work with it. But
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's such a and I think like your angle is more about talking with leaders, and mine is more about s- starting at the ground level to help the individual
right.
contributors um, think leadership, even if they don't have a title, so that when they
Yeah,
get the
but
title,
yeah, but both audiences,
yeah,
it's hard to do this stuff by yourself. These are really big challenges, and if you have
yeah,
somebody
right,
who can,
right,
walk you
yeah,
through that, it makes
yeah,
a
and
difference.
it's you were talking about Steve Kerr being interviewed. he has a particular coaching role with the Warriors, but at the same time, all the players on the team also have niche coaches who train them about specific things. I bet
Right.
that Steph Curry has a coach that only works on his ankles because he's had ankle problems in the past,
Right. Right.
right? He's had some really serious ankle injuries, and I bet part of his regular program now, aside from shooting baskets from wherever, is how do you make your ankles stronger, and who's the people that are training him to take care of that thing because his career relies on his ankles working.
And it's so liberating to get that kind. It's like when my older brother got a knee replacement. Yeah, I've been running since junior high school. I used to run long distance, and somewhere along the lines, I realized that the pounding my ankles and knees were getting was taking a toll. So I went to bicycling and hiking. But when Jim got his knee replacement, I went to a orthopedist. Said like, I have a lot of knee pain. I'm kind of wondering, what I can do to forestall getting a knee replacement. And we ended up getting X-rays and stuff. And she said, no, your knees are actually in great shape, which made me wonder like why I was experiencing so much pain. So then I found a coach who does knee work, knee strengthening, and I discovered that the reason I had so much knee pain is because the muscles around my above and below my knees weren't very well developed because I was so worried about the pain that I was backing off from that.
Yeah,
So once he showed me how to strengthen my knees, it was like transformative. Like I'm out there, like instead of hiking up the hill now, I started running uphill because I realized it's actually what I was afraid of was exactly the wrong thing. I was
right, right,
not doing the things that would build more strength and create more stability. You can't figure that out. You get confused by
right,
the
right.
signals. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This is this goes back to the whole idea of distress tolerance and
Yeah.
how learning distress tolerance and having somebody talk with you about it allows you to exist in that uncomfortable place. Your knee is a perfect example, right?
Well,
Being uncomfortable is how you make it stronger.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
But you can take it the wrong way and you can start, demanding more of your knee, thinking that you're
yeah,
being stress tolerant, but you actually, degrade it.
right. It's figuring out what's the middle path.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what's the informed path?
Yeah, yeah. Cool. This has been awesome. Thank you.
Cool.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we get recorded here? And by the way, I will put all of Tony's contact info in the show notes,
Cool.
and so how you can get hold of him. Um,
Yeah, Bill, I'm just going to say it's like I do leadership mentoring because there's nothing more fun than having a successful team. And
yeah,
there's nothing more fun for the team than having a lot of oxygen and inspiration in the climate. And
beautiful.
so there's room to make mistakes, there's room to learn, there's room to participate, and there's not this sort of discouraging environment of like, well, yeah, you said to me in another conversation that about mindsets. Like this mindset, it's better to live life as if life's a playground than as if it's a prison.
Right,
And
exactly. Yeah,
I thought about that, and I thought, like, in my case, I prefer to have life as a playground than as an exam. I used to have these nightmares of going to a college class, and the midterm was a pop quiz, and I wasn't ready for it. And it's like I don't know the answers to this, and that feels like shit. And a lot of my life was spent thinking like I had to perform, I had to like do it right and not fuck it up.
right.
And it was very constraining and constricting. And
Yep, yep,
this idea of good leadership communication is really about finding the freedom to have some fun and to be
yeah,
human and make mistakes, but to learn from them and be better prepared as you go. And it always, crazy thing is, it almost always seems to work out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We have a lot more fear of our mistakes than the actual consequences of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, cool. This has been awesome. I'm gonna stop the recording.